This is Beast, the Birmingham Electroacoustic Sound Theatre. The composer John T. Harrison is performing or diffusing his piece Unsound Objects. It's based on natural sounds, but has been composed using a computer. The audience hears the sound all around them, coming from 20 or more loudspeakers. Electronic or acousmatic composition already has a long history, but until recent developments in computing, it was a cumbersome business. In the early 60s, the American composer Milton Babbitt worked with a massive synthesizer installed by RCA at the University of Columbia. Composition involved punching holes in card or paper, which then instructed the computer generating the sounds.
In the beginning, everything was measured according to rulers. I mean, a potentiometer is also nothing but a ruler. You can see how many degrees of volume you are able to distinguish. And the same thing is true for the durations of the sounds. We measured them all with a ruler in fractions of an inch.
Tape is the key invention, really, because when you had tape recording, for the first time you were able to cut up sound with a pair of scissors.
Acousmatic composers often used second-hand pieces of electronic equipment, collecting them from radio studios, army surplus, or even junk shops. Sounds were recorded and edited on tape.
What I wanted is to compose each sound itself, its inner life. Well, the first sounds that I made were very dead, because they didn't move inside. But I had started to understand the principle of what sounds are.
Once you have a sound on a fixed medium, recorded, in other words, that sound can be manipulated. And those possible manipulations give you, as a composer, a whole new realm to explore, the rules for which may be completely different from the rules governing instrumental and vocal composition. The composer has at his or her disposal, at all times, all the sonic material of the piece as it is. There's no intermediary stage, there's no intermediary person. What we have now with computers, for me, is simply a transposition sideways, if you like, of all the techniques that were adopted and developed on the basis of tape technology. So you have multiple tape recorders or multi-track tape recorders, you have mixing desks, you have signal processing devices whereby sounds can be modified. Now all of this is available within a computer environment. One of my indulgences to myself was to buy myself a portable DAT machine, digital audio tape, small cassettes. And this accompanies me on most of my journeys around the place. And if I find an environment or a sound or anything that I like, I'll usually cause great consternation to the rest of my family by demanding that we stop the car, that they all be quiet, and I go off and make recordings for about 25 minutes. I've got a sound here, which is in fact the sound of fire. The sounds of fire, the sound of water are so crucial somewhere in our distant collective memory that they're very emotive for human beings. But on the sonic level alone, it's a very interesting sound. You get these sudden changes, these sudden sparks and spits of the fire, and yet there's always this background sort of thing going on, and you're aware of the latent power, and you can hear that somehow in the sound. You can hear the power in the sound coming through. This is Pro Tools that I have on the system here, and in Pro Tools there are a number of things available as plug-in processors, they're called. So if we put in a device called a graphic equalizer, all this is a way of accentuating the various frequency components in a sound. If I now play the sound and I move the mouse over the fader positions, I'm actually changing those fader positions, and the sound will change in real time. And so on. Another possible insert for this, another process that I might use, is quite an interesting one, which is really only possible with digital technology, which is a freezing algorithm. What I also can do, which works quite well, is that I can automate some of the changes that I might want to make. Pro Tools allows you to do this, and I've drawn a little graph here which says at this point load preset 12, at this point load preset 5, and so on. And if I run this section, you will see that as this tracks along this graph here, so things change in this setting. And I also put in the graphic equalizer again on that. The faders here that are highlighted in green, I've also drawn graphs for, which means that when I run the system again, you will see these tracking together. And each one is moving independently.
Joseph Anderson's piece is based on a piano work by John Cage, one of the great experimenters of 20th century music. Anderson has taken the chance elements in Cage's work and extended them to explore the relationship between music and noise, a topic which fascinated Cage himself.
The three main types of starting material were the piano itself, the recording of the piano.
I'm trying to remember. I think it must have begun for me.
Then there's a recording of Cage speaking. Then the other sound material was, of course, the record noise. The piece is really an interplay between the collision of these different sounds, and sometimes it's more or less direct mixing, one placed on top of the other, or a cut from one to the other as side by side. Sometimes it's a bit more intertwined. The voice speaks with the sound of a piano. Similarly, there are sections where the voice becomes noise, and the piano has the shape of noise, and all these different collisions can have different incarnations in one way or the other. Making the impossible possible is what I look to the computer to do.
Anderson's method of working involves the direct creation of sound at the computer.
The method that I use is one of the more powerful but also the more tedious methods of synthesizing sound. It's direct digital synthesis. The computer just crunches away on a set of instructions and then churns out some sound. This is a Bach chorale, and the orchestra is rather straightforward. It's simply made up of an oscillator, so the code for that, and an envelope generator. And we just give it a few things: duration, amplitude, rise and decay of the envelopes, the pitch of the note, and the waveform to be used. And then our score that will play that orchestra looks like this. And this group of notes here specifies the first phrase for the chorale in the soprano line.
To synthesize new sounds, Anderson uses a program within the computer called a score preprocessor.
Again, this screen looks like a whole bunch of numbers as well, but the numbers mean something different than notes. They're instructions to the score preprocessor to make a bunch of notes that make a certain kind of gesture shape. In this case, it's going to sound sort of like rattling a gamelan or bell. In a way, it's instructions to allow the computer to improvise. At the very top, we have a list of possible frequencies and the associated amplitudes that go with them. And this information here is derived from an actual analysis of the gong tone.
From the earliest days of acousmatic music, some composers have tried to bring together technology and live performers. In the 60s, Stockhausen asked musicians to improvise and then used electronic equipment to process the sounds.
The instrument, which is the source of the vibration, is no longer so important. What is important is what you do with it. That means, again, I can work now with all the traditional instruments, so I have the electronic equipment somewhere close to the players or in the hall, and the players produce the sound as live generators, and then, well, some other musicians sit in the hall and filter them, modulate them, distribute them in the hall, make them move between the speakers.
Computers allowed this process to be taken further. At IRCAM, the Music Research Institute in Paris, Pierre Boulez was able to record and instantly re-synthesize the sounds of instruments as the musicians were playing.
And now if I add a pedal to that, everything will be just related together. And now if I have more of it, all these sounds together, it will give a very complicated line which multiplies the original one.
I've gone through certain phases in my compositional life. One being out-and-out acousmatic composer, where I said, stuff performance. The performance is actually the guy at the desk who's diffusing, and it should all be on tape. But now I can see a lot of exciting opportunities for expressive performance and bringing the performer back on stage, because, let's face it, the visual element does help. And if you can combine the two, then why not? This example in my piece uses the violin when I'm playing it very traditionally, and then uses also quite acousmatic sounds based on a very similar process to the way Jonty's demonstrated. And there's a sort of bridge in the middle, which is my violin sounds that have been slightly treated. So you can hear that there are 3 layers. Myself on stage, violin sounds interspersed within the tape part, and the actual more concrete tape material. The way I've written this score is trying to put little upbeats and little pointers in the tape part that won't necessarily make it sound like a little click where it says, okay, you play now, but try and make these pointers part of the tape part, but also a very clear sound object upbeat for me to know, well, come in now. I recorded the violin part, put that on the machine, and then reconstructed a new violin part, adding the tape part at the same time. I really didn't want to write a tape part and then improvise a violin part above, or write a violin part and then add a tape part, because I wanted to write the piece as one whole unit.
At Beast, composers are closely involved in performance. Jonty Harrison operates the mixer which diffuses the sound to the network of speakers around the hall.
It's actually the reverse of a normal mixer, where you bring many signals together and mix them down to just, say, one stereo. What actually happens here is that the stereo signal comes in and is then duplicated onto all the output faders. So instead of being, mixers usually described as so many in, so many out, like 24 in, 8 out, or something like this, this is actually 12 in, 32 out, which is completely upside down. What is actually happening is that each fader is driving a particular amplifier, which in turn is driving a particular loudspeaker in the room. And so what you're doing is changing the stereo disposition between one stereo pair of loudspeakers and another. You need always, somewhere, at some point, to be able to bring the image very tight into the middle. And so we have what we call the main, some people call the solo speakers, which are the ones that are more or less right in front of me. But beyond that, I would also need some wider loudspeakers, so there's a wide pair. And I've put those on the mixer next door. With these two, I'm able to make the image expand and contract laterally. Another thing that we found always really to be necessary is that we need a pair of loudspeakers in the distance. And now these are in fact right up in the far corners. We've angled them in. So they're actually angled across quite a long way in front of me. I mean, the image actually thereby is maintained up there as a distant image, another plane behind this frontal array. And my distant speakers are there. Now, so far, that's 6 loudspeakers all in front of us. And of course, we also can hear behind us. So we have a pair at the rear. Those are the most significant loudspeakers. If I were to make sudden motions of the loudspeakers, those would be the things that would give the cues to the listener that the sound is moving around. I would say the next most important things are these 4, which are, in the case of these two, the subwoofers, or the bins, we call them the bass bins. In other words, very low frequency speakers. And then to complement the bottom end, we also have the top end, the tweeters. They don't require, like most cone and diaphragm type loudspeakers, these don't need any cabinets, which is great for us, because what we've actually done is put them on the end of these arrays that look something like umbrellas. And these actually go through an equalizer, so all you're picking up are the topmost frequencies, and it has the effect of lifting the image without you necessarily being aware that all the sound's coming from up there. It's not that effect, it's one of sort of lifting the image slightly and lightening it. I regard this very much as an extension of the compositional process, and the same kinds of concerns that occupy me as a composer when I'm in the studio working with material continue to occupy me at the point of public performance, because it's at that point that a particular individual in the audience will hear the piece. I think that our ears are very underrated. Our ears are capable of taking in and processing far more information than they're normally given credit for. There is a section where there are the sounds of footsteps on 3 different surfaces. One is gravel, one is shingle by the seashore, and the other is snow. Now, you cannot physically have those 3 coexisting, but they can coexist orally, and you could believe in them all. And the experience, because one is able to cut, because one is able to dissolve, and all those other techniques that cinema has, it is like a kind of internalized cinema that happens when the ear is stimulated in this way. One is able to track through what might, in another dimension, be a cinematographic experience, but it's entirely orally triggered an experience, and in fact the projection is internal and not external.